His champion bay was bleeding from the mouth. A widow found the Splinter in an hour. The stagecoach did not slow when it reached the edge of Harlan Creek. It simply stopped, the driver calling back that this was as far as the road went, and if she was headed to the Denison spread, she could walk the rest. Hattie climbed down with her bag on her shoulder and her chin level, and she did not look back at the driver. There was nothing useful behind her. There was a town ahead, if you could call it that, a livery, a dry goods, a church with a leaning cross, a scattering of frame buildings along a dirt main street so pale with dust it looked bleached. The afternoon sun pressed down on everything like a flat iron. She had 43 cents and a letter that said there was a position available as a cook and housekeeper at the Thatcher Denison Ranch, 3 miles south of town. The letter was 2 months old. She had learned not to put too much faith in old letters. The walk took her the better part of an hour. The land opened up as she moved away from town, grass going long and gold on either side of the rutted track, cottonwoods marking where water ran underground. She could smell sage and the faint sweetness of cattle somewhere in the distance. Her boots raised little puffs of dust with every step, and by the time she saw the gate, 2 posts and a crossbar with the brand burned into the wood, a simple D with a line beneath it. Her hem was gray to the knee. The ranch yard was orderly. That surprised her. She had passed through enough failed homesteads to know what neglect looked like, and this was not it. The house was a solid 2-story with a covered porch, the barn behind it freshly lime-washed, the fences tight and true. There was a water trough by the gate, and beyond it, a paddock where 3 horses stood at the rail. One of them was not standing still. Hattie stopped walking. The bay horse, the big one at the near end of the paddock, was moving in that particular way that meant wrong. He was not lame, his legs were fine, but his head was going in slow, side-to-side sweeps, and every few seconds he would stop and press his nose toward the ground and then lift it again, mouth working. There was something darkly wet on his lips. She set her bag down beside the gatepost without thinking about it. She did not call out. She walked to the paddock fence and put her hand on the top rail and stood still, watching him. He was magnificent. Deep red-brown coat, black points, ablaze like a white flame from forehead to nostril. Even distressed, he moved with the kind of authority that came from breeding and good keeping. She could see his ribs working harder than they should. She could see the blood. "You there!" The voice came from the barn. Not a shout, just a carrying voice, the kind that was used to being heard. She did not turn immediately. She kept her eyes on the horse. The position was filled 3 weeks ago. She turned then. A man stood in the barn doorway, close enough that she could see the set of his shoulders and the way his arms were crossed. Tall, dark-haired, a face that had seen weather and not softened for it. He was looking at her the way she had been looked at before, like something that had arrived uninvited and would need to be dealt with. "Your bay is bleeding from the mouth," she said. A pause. "I know that. Do you know why?" He walked toward the paddock, slow and deliberate. He stopped on the other side of the fence from her. Up close, he was broader than she had estimated, and there was something in his face that was not merely impatience. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved from her to the horse and back. "The vet from Salida was supposed to come this morning," he said. He did not. "May I go in?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You a horsewoman?" "I am a woman who knows when an animal is in pain," she said. "That will do for now." Something shifted in his face. Not softness, more like a gate moving on a hinge, just slightly. He reached over and unlatched the paddock gate. She went in slow. She had learned horses from her father before she had learned much else, and the first thing her father ever told her was that a frightened animal does not need your hurry. It needs your calm. She let the bay see her coming, let him smell her hand before she touched his neck, spoke to him in a low, even murmur that was not quite words. He trembled once, and then let her near. She looked at his mouth carefully. The blood was on the gum, not the tongue, not the throat. She could see where the tissue was swollen and angry on the lower left. She pressed gently with 2 fingers, and the horse flinched, but did not pull away. There, under the gum line, deep enough to miss if you were only looking from outside. A splinter, a long one, probably from a fence rail or a feed trough, driven up under the soft tissue and working its way in. She turned to the man at the fence. I need something thin and clean, a pocket knife or a seam ripper if you have one, and a cloth. A seam ripper, or a thin-bladed knife, something with a fine point, and clean water if you can get it quickly. He disappeared toward the house without another word. She kept her hand on the bay's neck and talked to him, and the horse stood and breathed and let her. The man came back with a folding knife, a length of clean rag, and a tin cup of water. He came into the paddock this time without asking. He stood close, but not in her way, and she noticed that his own hand went to the horse's shoulder, not reaching, just resting, the way a person does when they have had their hands on an animal 1,000 times, and the gesture is automatic. It took her less than 10 minutes. The splinter was nearly 2 inches long. She worked carefully, without rushing, with the kind of deliberateness that her father had taught her was not patience, but precision. When the piece of wood came free, the horse exhaled so hard she felt it against her cheek, and she pressed the cloth against the wound and held it and kept talking. She became aware that the man had not moved, that he was watching her hands. He will be sore for a few days, she said without turning. The wound needs to be rinsed with salt water twice a day. You should watch for heat or swelling. If the tissue starts to pucker or smell, you will need a doctor, but I think he will be all right. Silence. Then, how did you know it was a splinter? The way he was moving his mouth, and the blood was fresh, not old. Whatever was wrong had gotten worse today, not last week. That narrows it. She turned then and found him closer than she had expected. The afternoon light caught the side of his face, and she saw, for just a moment, the man underneath the closed expression. Something raw there, something that had nothing to do with the horse. Thatcher Dennison, he said. Hattie Voss. The position is filled, Mrs. Voss. I heard you the first time, she said. She handed him the bloodied cloth and picked up her bag from the gate. She had walked perhaps 20 yards back toward the road when he called after her. There is a room in the bunkhouse annex, he said. The cook I hired lasted 4 days. You can sleep there tonight if you need somewhere. She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. And in the morning? She asked. A long pause. In the morning, we will see. The bunkhouse annex was a small room at the end of the building, walled off from the main sleeping quarters by rough-cut pine boards. There was a cot, a washstand, a window that faced east. Someone had left a tin cup on the sill. It still had the ring of old coffee inside it. Hattie washed her face and hands and sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the window going dark. She had buried her husband 14 months ago. Chester Voss had been a decent man in most ways, and a careless one in a few important ones. And when the fever took him, it had also taken the farm, because there had been debts she did not know about until the creditors arrived. She had sold what she could, paid what she could, and started moving west because west was where people went when East had run out. She was 34 years old. She was not afraid of work. She was not afraid of hard men. She was afraid, somewhere under the practical surface of herself, of the particular kind of loneliness that came from being surrounded by people and still being invisible. She had felt that loneliness her entire marriage. She did not want to feel it again. She said a quiet prayer before she lay down, the way her mother had taught her, and then she slept. In the morning, she was in the kitchen before the sun was fully up. She found the larder, adequate but disorganized, and the stove, which needed its flue cleaned but was otherwise sound. There was cornmeal and salt pork and dried beans and a crock of lard. There were eggs from the yard. She made what she could and had it on the table by the time boots sounded on the porch. Thatcher Dennison stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the table, then at her. "I did not ask for this," he said. "No," she agreed. "You did not. I made it anyway. If you do not want it, leave it." She poured 2 cups of coffee and set one at the head of the table, and took the other to the window and stood looking out at the yard. Behind her, she heard the scrape of a chair. He ate in silence. She watched a hawk turn slow circles above the south pasture. "There are 4 ranch hands," he said eventually. "They take their meals in the bunkhouse. My daughter eats with me. She is 8 years old and she does not speak much. Not because she cannot. She chooses not to, mostly. Her name is Nora." Hattie turned from the window. When did she stop speaking? His jaw worked. "After her mother died, 2 years ago." She did not say she was sorry. She had learned that people who were truly grieving did not need the words. They had heard them too many times, and the words had gone empty. She just nodded and set down her cup. "I will need to know what you want Nora to eat," she said, "and whether she has any schooling, because if she does not, I can teach her while I cook. It is no extra effort." He looked at her for the first time that morning with something other than reserve. It was brief, a flicker, and then the wall came back up, but she had seen it. "We will talk about wages," he said. "Yes," she said. "We will." Nora Dennison was small for 8, with her father's dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She came into the kitchen that first morning like a shadow and sat at the table and watched Hattie move without expression. She did not reach for the plate Hattie set in front of her until Hattie had turned back to the stove, as if she did not want to be seen wanting something. Hattie understood that feeling perfectly. She did not push the girl to talk. She simply worked and let Nora watch. And sometimes she named things as she used them, the way she might with a young child who was just learning, except without condescension. "This is chamomile. It settles a nervous stomach. This is the good knife, the one with the nick in the handle. These beans need another hour." Sometimes she hummed while she worked, old hymns her mother had sung, not performing them, but just letting them out the way breath comes out. On the 3rd day, Nora appeared at her elbow while she was hanging herbs to dry and pointed at a bundle of something pale and feathery. "Wild fennel," Hattie said. "Your pa's south pasture is full of it near the creek. It smells sweet when you crush it. Here." She broke off a small piece and held it out. Nora took it and pressed it between her fingers and brought it to her nose. "Sweet," she said. It was the first word Hattie had heard from her. By the end of the first week, she had the kitchen running properly, the larder reorganized, the bunkhouse hands fed without complaint, and a tentative thread of something growing between herself and the silent girl. She had also learned a few things about Thatcher Dennison that he had not told her directly. He had come to this territory 7 years ago with his wife and nothing else, and built the ranch from grassland. He did not talk about his wife. She had gathered that from the way the hands went carefully quiet if her name came up. He ran 600 head of cattle and had 2 men who worked the horses. His champion bay, whose name was Cannon, was the finest cutting horse in 3 counties, and the man who owned the largest competing ranch, a man named Burl Pickett, who ran his spread from the north side of Harlan Creek, had been trying to buy him for 2 years. Thatcher Dennison had refused every time. She understood that about him, she thought. The horse was not just a horse. The horse was proof of something. She did not yet know what. She saw Thatcher Dennison every morning at breakfast and every evening at supper, and throughout the day in glimpses, crossing the yard, working a horse in the round pen, bent over the accounts at the desk in the front room with his door open. He did not invite conversation, and she did not force it, but she noticed things. The way he checked Cannon's mouth every evening, gently, the way she had shown him. The way he left the lamp burning in the main room on the nights Nora had bad dreams, even after the girl had settled back to sleep. The way he paused at the kitchen door sometimes before he knocked, as though he was collecting himself before he came in. He was a man who carried everything inside, and had been doing it alone for a long time, and the weight of it showed in the set of his shoulders even when his face was composed. On the 8th morning, she found firewood by the kitchen door, stacked neatly, that had not been there the night before. None of the hands had done it. The trouble announced itself on a Tuesday in the form of Burl Pickett's wagon coming up the ranch road, with Pickett himself on the seat and 2 of his men on horseback behind him. Hattie was on the porch shelling beans, and she watched the wagon come and felt the quality of the air change, the way it does before weather. Pickett was a broad man, florid-faced, with the easy confidence of someone who had rarely been told no. He climbed down from the wagon without hurry and looked at the house and then looked at Hattie with an expression that assessed her and dismissed her in approximately the same moment. "Where's Dennison?" he said, not a question. "I will let him know you are here," she said. "Do that." She set the beans aside and went inside and found Thatcher coming down the stairs already. He had heard the wagon. Their eyes met in the hallway, and something passed between them. Some silent understanding that this was not a social call, and she stepped back to give him the door. She went back to the porch. She did not go inside. She picked up her beans and kept her hands busy and listened, because this was the kind of conversation it was useful to hear. Pickett wanted Cannon. He had raised his price again, a number that made even the hands exchange glances. Thatcher said no. Pickett said that was short-sighted, given that Dennison was carrying more debt than people knew, and a horse was just a horse. There was a silence that pressed down hard. Then Thatcher said that Pickett needed to get off his land. Pickett laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. He said he would be back, and he climbed into his wagon, and he left. Thatcher stood on the porch after the wagon disappeared. He did not move for a long time. Hattie shelled beans. The afternoon buzzed with heat. "You heard all of that?" he said finally. "Most of it." "And?" She considered for a moment. "He said you are carrying debt. Is that true?" A long pause. "Some." "Is Cannon part of the collateral?" His head turned toward her sharply. She met his look without flinching. "How do you know about collateral?" "My husband left debts," she said. "I learned what I needed to learn quickly. If Pickett knows about the debt and Cannon is the asset he is targeting, then Pickett has been talking to whoever holds your note. That is not a man coming to buy a horse. That is a man who has already made a plan." The silence stretched out. A fly droned past. Somewhere in the barn, Cannon moved in his stall, and the sound of his hooves was hollow and familiar. "You read?" Thatcher asked. Yes. Write as well? Better than I read. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him deciding something. After supper, he said, bring whatever patience you have. I need someone to go through 6 months of accounts with me and tell me what I am not seeing. They sat at the desk in the front room that night with a lamp between them and papers spread in every direction. Nora had long since gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the scratch of Hattie's pencil and the occasional sound of Thatcher turning a page. He was not good with figures. He was not stupid, she could see that immediately. But he had the kind of mind that was built for land and animals and the physical problems of making a ranch run, not for the columns of numbers that were slowly tightening around him. His bookkeeping was not dishonest, just imprecise, and imprecision over months added up. She worked carefully and without comment, and when she had found what she was looking for, she set the pencil down. Your feed merchant, she said. Dawson and Sons. He has been charging you the same price since last spring, but your amounts have been adjusting week to week, slightly under what you ordered. Not enough to notice if you are not looking. Over 6 months, it comes to nearly $200. Thatcher's face went still. Show me. She showed him. He sat for a long time with the figures in front of him, and she watched his hands on the desk, flat, controlled. And she understood that he was furious in that particular way that very contained men get furious. All the energy turned inward and pressing hard. Dawson and Pickett are neighbors, she said quietly. He looked up. His eyes were dark in the lamplight, and for just a moment she saw something in them that was not anger. Something more complicated and older than anger. You got here 9 days ago, he said. Yes. And you found this in one evening. I knew what to look for. The lamp between them guttered slightly in a draft from the window. Neither of them moved to adjust it. She was acutely conscious of how close they were sitting, of the warmth of the lamp on the left side of her face, of his hand very near to hers on the desk. Hattie, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She had heard it before, from Nora, from the hands, but from his mouth it landed differently, lower, more careful, as though he had weighed it first. What do you need from me? She said, because he was looking at her like he was trying to say something that did not have words yet, and she thought it would be kinder to give him a practical direction. He blinked once. The wall came back. In the morning, he said, I need to go to town and talk to Mr. Caldwell at the bank. It would help if you came. All right, she said. She gathered the papers into order and left them on the desk for him, and took the lamp and said good night, and went down the hall to the kitchen to bank the stove for the night. Her hands were perfectly steady. She did not let them shake until she was alone. The ride into town the next morning was the first time they had been side by side for any length of time outside the ranch. He gave her the steadier horse, a gray mare with a smooth gait. He rode Cannon, which surprised her. But then again, she thought, perhaps it did not. If Pickett was trying to take the horse, keeping him close made sense. They did not talk much on the ride. The land was beautiful in the morning, the light coming in low and gold across the grass, and she let herself simply look at it, the way she had not let herself do in a long time. There had been a period, long before Chester, when she had been a girl who took pleasure in small things. She had forgotten how to do that, and was only now remembering in pieces. At the bank, she sat to the side while Thatcher spoke with Caldwell, and she watched the banker's face, and she did not like what she saw there. Caldwell was a careful man, the sort whose sympathies traveled toward whoever currently held the most leverage. He listened to Thatcher's account of the feed merchant discrepancy with an expression of concern that did not quite reach his eyes. When Thatcher was done, Caldwell said he would look into it. He said it the way people say they will look into things when they have already decided not to. On the way out of the bank, they passed a woman on the boardwalk who looked at Hattie and then deliberately looked away, and then leaned toward the woman beside her and said something behind her gloved hand. Hattie kept walking. She was used to that particular form of welcome in new towns. Thatcher had seen it. His jaw was set. "Eugenia Pickett," he said when they were past. "Bro Pickett's wife. She runs the social order of Harlan Creek the way Burl runs the North Range. Whatever she decides about you will set the tone for how the town treats you." And she has decided. She has decided. Hattie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not your fault, and not your problem to fix." "It is my problem if it makes your life here difficult." The word "here" landed in a particular way, and she was not sure if he had meant it to. 3 weeks into her time at the Dennison Ranch, Cannon colicked. It happened on a Sunday evening, the light going amber and long, and she knew it the moment she heard Thatcher's voice from the barn. Not a shout, but a compression of sound that was its own kind of alarm. She went without being called. She was still wearing her apron. The horse was in distress. His flanks were dark with sweat, and he kept trying to lie down, which was the danger. A horse that rolls with a twisted gut can make it worse. One of the hands was trying to walk him, and Cannon was having none of it, pulling against the halter, his eyes showing white. "Get him moving," Hattie said. "He won't. Give me the lead." She did not look at Thatcher for permission. She took the lead rope from the hand and turned to the horse and did what she had always done. Went still inside herself, that deep quiet that animals seem to find, and spoke to Cannon in the low, steady voice and moved. Just moved. Slowly, a circle, a direction. The horse followed. She walked him for 2 hours. Thatcher stayed. He did not try to take over. He stood and watched with his arms at his sides, and she could feel his attention on her like a physical thing, the particular quality of a person who is used to carrying everything alone and has just discovered they do not have to. Around the second hour, Cannon passed the blockage. She heard Thatcher exhale. She kept walking until she was certain the horse was stable, and then she handed the lead back and leaned against the stall gate and let the exhaustion she had been holding back arrive. Her apron was ruined. Her feet hurt. Her hair had come completely loose. She heard his footsteps behind her, and then he was beside her at the gate, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, and he said nothing at all, and she said nothing, and they stood there in the smell of hay and horse and warm lantern light while Cannon drank deeply from his bucket. "Thank you," he said finally, quietly. "He is a good horse," she said. "Yes." A pause. "You should not have to do that," he said. "That is not what I hired you for." "You did not hire me," she pointed out. "You offered me a room for the night. Then it became something else. Neither of us has been very precise about what." He turned his head and looked at her, and the lamplight was amber between them, and she thought, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that she had not felt looked at, truly looked at, in a very long time. She pushed off the gate. "I will check on Nora," she said. "She may have heard the commotion." She made herself walk, not hurry, and she told herself that a look was just a look, and that the warmth in her chest was the lamp, and that she was a practical woman with no business feeling things she had not been invited to feel. She was not entirely convincing. It was Nora who said it first, the way children say the things that adults have been carefully not saying. They were in the kitchen 3 days later, Nora on her stool at the end of the work table, Hattie rolling out biscuit dough. Nora had a piece of the dough herself and was pressing shapes into it with a tin cutter shaped like a star. "Papa watches you," Nora said. Hattie kept rolling. "Your father watches everyone on his ranch. That is his job." "Not like that." A silence. "Like what?" Hattie said, carefully. Nora pressed a star very deliberately into the dough. "Like when Cannon got sick and you walked him. Papa did not even blink. His eyes just watched you the whole time." Hattie set down the rolling pin. She looked at this small, serious girl, and she understood that she was not being teased or tested. She was being offered something. A child who had stopped talking did not give away words casually. "Your father is a very private man," Hattie said. "Yes." "And I am not going anywhere," she added. "Whatever else happens, I want you to know that." Nora looked up from her dough. Her expression was the kind of careful hopefulness that has been disappointed before and knows how to protect itself. "Promise?" she said. It was such a small word. It landed with such weight. "Promise," Hattie said. The threat came on a Friday, from a direction she had not expected. She had gone into town alone for the first time, with a list from Thatcher and the ranch horse and a clear morning. She had done what she needed at the dry goods and was coming out when she found herself facing a man she did not know, or did not know yet. He was lean and sun-darkened, with a deputy star on his chest that did not sit right on him somehow, too shiny, too recently applied. He said his name was Paris, and he was Harlan Creek's new deputy under the county sheriff, and he had some questions about a Harriet Ann Voss, formerly of Caldera County, who had departed that county, owing money to the estate of one Chester Voss's creditors, money that had not been settled, and there was a civil warrant. She stood on the boardwalk with her flour and her sugar in a cloth sack, and she looked at this man, and she did not let one thing show on her face. "I am aware of the Voss estate situation," she said. "I disputed the assessment. The case was heard and determined. I have the paperwork." "At the ranch?" "Yes." "Then I suppose you will need to bring it to the county sheriff's office in Dalton by end of next week," he said. He smiled in a way that was not friendly. "And in the meantime, it might be best for everyone if you stayed close to Harlan Creek." She rode back to the ranch and put the horse away and put the groceries away, and then sat at the kitchen table with her hands in her lap and breathed. The paperwork was real. The judgment had been in her favor, barely, by the skin of a sympathetic judge in 4 months of her life. But the warrant Paris had described did not match anything she had received, which meant it was either a different matter she did not know about, which was possible, or it was not a real warrant at all. And Paris had Pickett's particular flavor of confidence about him. She was still sitting there when Thatcher came in from the yard. He saw her face immediately. He stopped. "What happened?" he said. She told him all of it. She told him plainly and without embellishment and without asking for anything, because she had not asked anyone for anything in years, and she was not sure she still knew how. When she finished, he was very quiet for a moment. His eyes had gone to a particular quality, focused inward, somewhere between thinking and deciding. "The deputy who came to Caldera County last spring to ask about your Chester Voss's property," he said. "Was his name Paris?" She stared at him. "I did not know it was Paris then," he said. "I know it now. Burl Pickett hired him as his ranch foreman 18 months ago, and then paid someone in the county government to put the badge on him. Harlan Creek does not have a real deputy. What it has is Pickett's man with legal-looking paper." She let that settle. Then the warrant is not real. Or if it is, the debt behind it was manufactured. How do you know this? Because Pickett did the same thing to the homesteader south of me 2 years ago. Manufactured a debt, fabricated a legal claim, and had the man gone within the month. His voice was flat and controlled, the way a fire is controlled, the heat entirely present, just contained. I did not act then. I have regretted it every day since. She looked at him. Why are you telling me this? He met her eyes. Because I am not going to watch it happen again. What followed was not a grand confrontation, but a series of small, decisive actions, the kind that, in her experience, were more effective than grand ones. Thatcher wrote 2 letters that evening at the desk while she sat across from him and organized everything she had brought from Caldera County. Every piece of paper from the estate settlement, every record of the judgment, the name of the judge who had ruled, the date and the docket number. She had kept all of it in a tin box at the bottom of her bag because she had known, on some level, that she might need it. She was not a woman who threw away proof. He sent 1 letter to the actual county sheriff in Dalton, a man named Hereford, who, by Thatcher's account, was honest and had a long-standing dislike of Pickett. He sent the 2nd letter to a lawyer in Dalton who had worked with him on a land dispute 2 years before. The next morning, he asked her to come with him to see the minister, a lean, dry-faced man named Garrick, who ran the leaning church on the main street of Harlan Creek. Garrick was not a man who liked Pickett. Thatcher said that Pickett had maneuvered to get a different minister hired 3 years ago and failed, and Garrick had not forgotten. He looked at Hattie's papers, and he nodded, slowly, and said that if it came to testimony, he would give it. You have been here before, Hattie said as they rode back. Pickett takes something from everyone eventually, Thatcher said. Most people do not fight back because they cannot afford to. I can afford to. She thought about that for a moment. About what it meant that a man with the resources to fight had built walls so high that he had stood by while a neighbor lost his homestead. She thought about what breaks in a man when he feels responsible for a harm he did not stop. She thought she understood his damage a little better. The things she had not expected came from Eugenia Pickett, and it came in the form of a story that spread through Harlan Creek over 3 days. The story was that Hattie Voss was a woman of poor character who had left Caldera County ahead of a criminal charge, not a civil one. That she had abandoned her husband's family without settling his debts, that she had been a laundress in a saloon, which was not quite said to mean what everyone would hear it to mean. That Thatcher Dennison was a good man who had taken her in out of charity and was being taken advantage of. She heard it first from one of the ranch hands who told her with embarrassed, stumbling kindness because he thought she should know. She thanked him and went back into the kitchen, and she stood at the window looking out at the yard where Thatcher was working cannon in the round pen, and she felt the particular burn of that kind of injustice, the kind you cannot argue against because it has no face, no author, nothing to stand across from and refute. She thought about leaving, not because she wanted to, because she was accustomed to the calculation. What does staying cost? And who does it cost it to? She had made that calculation before, and the answer had usually been the same. But she had promised Nora. And something in her, some piece that had been quietly rebuilding itself over these weeks among the herbs and the horse smell and the early mornings and the lamp burning late over account books, that piece had grown unwilling to be moved. She was still at the window when she heard his boots on the porch. He came into the kitchen, and he looked at her face, and he said, "You have heard." "Yes." "Then you know that Eugenia Pickett has started a campaign against you." "I assumed as much." He crossed the kitchen and stood beside her at the window, both of them looking out at the same empty yard. She could feel the warmth of him. She was aware of every inch of distance between them and acutely aware of how small it was. "I want to tell you something," he said. She waited. "When my wife died," he said, "I stopped." A pause. Not difficulty finding words, deliberateness in choosing them. I stopped wanting things. Nora stopped talking, and I thought, that is right. That is what we deserve. To be quiet now. To just work and not want and not feel. He paused again. I was wrong. I knew I was wrong, and I went on being wrong because it was easier than the other thing. She turned her head and looked at him. "The other thing," she said. "Wanting something again," he said. "Being afraid of losing it." The yard was very bright in the afternoon light. Cannon moved in his pen, his red coat catching the sun. "I am not easy to run off," she said. "I know that. And I am not what Eugenia Pickett says I am." "I know that too." He turned toward her, and there was something in his face that she had not seen there before. Open, unguarded, stripped of the control that he wore like a second coat. "I knew it the first day. I watched you go into that paddock, and I watched you with my horse, and I thought, whoever this woman is, she is not what she appears to be. She is more, and I was afraid of that." She could feel her own heartbeat. She kept very still. "She built something for you," she said quietly. "Your wife. She gave you Nora. She gave you the reason for all of this." Her voice was even. "I would not want to be someone who made you forget that." "You are not making me forget anything," he said. "You are making me remember that I am still alive." A silence settled between them, not empty, but full. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was warm and calloused, and she felt the touch from her ear down to her feet. He let his hand fall, slowly, and she caught it before it dropped, just briefly, just the press of her fingers over his knuckles, and then she let it go. "Let us deal with Pickett first," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and something like a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. Not the guarded ghost she had seen before. Something real. "Yes," he said. The county sheriff arrived in Harlan Creek on a Wednesday with 2 of his own men and a disposition that suggested he had ridden 4 hours and was not in the mood for theatrics. Hereford was a short man with a thick gray mustache and the kind of authority that comes from years of doing a hard job correctly. He had Thatcher's letter, and he had received a copy of the Caldera County judgment from the lawyer in Dalton, and he had some questions for Deputy Paris. Paris was found at Pickett's North Range house, which said everything that needed saying about whose deputy he actually was. The warrant against Hattie was examined and found to reference a docket number that did not correspond to any open case in Dalton County. Hereford said this in the dry, factual voice of a man who had seen manufactured paper before and was not impressed by it. Burl Pickett arrived at the sheriff's impromptu hearing in the dry goods store with the bearing of a man who expected to control the room and found that the room had already been arranged without him. He looked at Thatcher and then at Hattie, and his face made a slow, hard journey from confidence to calculation to something that was not quite anger, but was close to it. Minister Garrick testified to the character of the woman he had come to know over the past weeks. 2 of the ranch hands testified that the warrant had been served by a man in Pickett's employ. Hattie laid her papers on the counter, and the sheriff read them and folded them and handed them back. He said there was no active warrant against Harriet Ann Voss. He said the Deputy Paris would need to come to Dalton and explain his conduct. He said Burl Pickett might want to speak with a lawyer about the civil liability attached to causing a wrongful harassment. Pickett left without speaking. On the way out of the dry goods store, Hattie and Thatcher had to pass Eugenia Pickett, who was standing on the boardwalk with two of the women who had been spreading her story. Eugenia looked at Hattie with an expression that had curdled into something between embarrassment and defiance. Thatcher stopped. He looked at Eugenia Pickett, and he said, in the carrying voice that was used to being heard, "Mrs. Voss has worked for me for 5 weeks. She has more skill, more honesty, and more courage than most people in this town. Anyone who says otherwise to her face or behind her back will answer to me." He said it the way he said everything, not with bluster, just with the particular weight of a man who means what he says and has always meant what he says. Eugenia's mouth thinned. She did not speak. Hattie did not let herself look at Thatcher until they were back at the horses. When she did, she found him watching her with that open, unguarded expression that she was beginning to recognize as the real version of him. "You did not need to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "You did it anyway." "Yes." She mounted the gray mare, and he swung onto Cannon, and they rode out of Harlan Creek together. And she thought about what it felt like to be spoken for by someone who had chosen to speak, not out of obligation, but out of something that had no other name. In the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The feed merchant Dawson was confronted with the accounting discrepancy, and the money was recovered. The note on the ranch was renegotiated through the Dalton lawyer with a bank in the next county, one that did not have Caldwell's particular sympathies. Paris disappeared from Harlan Creek, and with him the official-looking paper that had been Pickett's main instrument of pressure. Pickett himself was quieter. He was not gone from the world. Men like Pickett were never gone. But he had learned, for the moment, what the cost of pressing too hard would be. Nora had begun to speak more each day, not dramatically but steadily, like water finding a path. She had asked Hattie to teach her to read the plants along the creek. She had asked her father to let her ride the gray mare on a lead. She had told Hattie, in the matter-of-fact way of children, that she thought her father smiled more now than she could remember. Hattie had stored that piece of information carefully, like a jar in the larder, like something valuable against winter. One evening in late October, when the cottonwoods along the creek had gone yellow and the air had the first real bite of coming cold, Thatcher appeared in the kitchen doorway after supper with something in his hands. A shelf. Small, pine, carefully made, with a row of small wooden pegs below it and a carved edge at the top that she recognized, after a moment, as a string of prairie flowers. "For the herb jars," he said. "Your drying bundles keep falling from the ceiling hooks." She stood and looked at it, and at him holding it, and she felt something in her chest that was not quite sadness and not quite joy, but was made of both of them. The way things are when you have been lonely long enough and the loneliness starts to end. "Thatcher," she said. "I know," he said. "I know what I am saying with this. I want to be clear about it." She crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and looked up at his face, serious and open and still carrying that old damage that would never entirely leave, because damage does not leave. It just becomes part of the person, and you love the person and the damage along with it. "I have been here 6 weeks," she said. "I know." "That is not very long." "No," he agreed. "It is not." "I promised your daughter I was not going anywhere." His eyes were very still on hers. "Is that the only reason?" She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, the way she had put her hand against Cannon's neck that first day. feeling for the animal truth beneath the surface. "No," she said, "it is not." He set the shelf down very carefully against the wall, and then he put both his hands on either side of her face, and he kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when he has been keeping himself from it for a long time and has finally, at significant cost to his pride, stopped being afraid. It was brief. It was careful. It was the kind of kiss that was a promise rather than an arrival. When he lifted his head, she kept her eyes closed for just a moment. She heard him exhale slowly. "There is one more thing," he said. She opened her eyes. "I wrote to the territorial court last week," he said, "about formalizing your employment. They require 2 signatories for domestic arrangements on working ranches." He paused. "There is a simpler way to handle it, if you were willing." She looked at him. "That is possibly the least romantic way anyone has ever said that," she said. Something happened to his face. Slowly, unmistakably, completely, he laughed. Not the ghost of a laugh, not a controlled, brief acknowledgement of humor. A real laugh from somewhere deep in his chest, with his head going back and his eyes crinkling at the corners, and it transformed him entirely, and she saw who he had been before the grief, and she loved both versions, the closed man and this one. "I will do better," he said when he had gathered himself. "Give me until Sunday." "All right," she said. "Sunday." On Sunday, he asked her properly, on the porch at dusk with the last of the light going gold across the grass, and Cannon grazing in the paddock, and Nora sitting on the step with her star-shaped biscuit tin, pretending to be very interested in something in the yard that was not her father going down on one knee. There was no ring yet. There would be one, he said, when he got to Dalton. She said she did not need a ring immediately. He said he knew and he would get one anyway. She said yes. Nora said, without looking up from her tin, "I knew it." The winter that year came early but not hard. The cottonwoods went bare, and the creek ran low and cold, and the morning smelled of wood smoke from every chimney in the valley. Hattie hung her herbs on the new shelf, and the kitchen smelled of sage and dried chamomile, and the particular warmth of a fire that was not going out. On Christmas morning, Nora woke them both before dawn with a noise that turned out to be entirely made up in order to get them up to see the frost on the window glass, which had made a pattern that she insisted looked like a horse. Thatcher said it looked like a cloud. Hattie said she could see the horse if she tilted her head. They stood together at the window, the 3 of them, in the gray pre-dawn light, and Nora's hand found Hattie's on one side and Thatcher's on the other, and she pressed them together. Hattie looked at the frost and let herself feel it, the warmth behind her, the cold glass in front, the small, certain hand in hers. The way the house sounded when it held people who belonged in it. Outside, Cannon stood in his paddock in the pale morning, steam rising from his back, whole and healed and undefeated. She had arrived on a road to nowhere, with 43 cents and an old letter, and she had found, not by searching for it, but by staying when everything said leave, by using what she had when everyone said she had nothing. She had found the only thing that had been worth finding all along. A home. Not a building. A home. She pressed her fingers a little tighter around Thatcher's hand. He pressed back. He did not let go. If this story made you feel something, if you have ever been underestimated and had to prove your worth through action instead of words, leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever seen someone truly change when the right person believed in them? Hit the like button if this story found its way to your heart, and subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. And tell me, would you have gone into that paddock that first day, with a stranger's horse and a stranger's eyes watching every move you made?